They called it magic, not because it was unknowable, but because it wasn't theirs to understand. Because the formulas were hidden in symbols they refused to read. Because the numbers sang in rhythms they had long forgotten. Because the people who held the knowledge didn't speak their tongue, but whispered to the stars, the rivers, and the stones. Long before Europe woke up, Africa was already dreaming in numbers, measuring the heavens, splitting time, healing the body, moving metal through fire and breath. And when the colonizers came, they didn't ask how, they only asked where the gold was. They burned the manuscripts, laughed at the temples, called the black man primitive while stealing his blueprints. What they didn't understand, they labeled myth. What they couldn't replicate, they called sorcery. What they feared, they buried. But you cannot erase truth written into stone. You cannot silence a continent whose heartbeat is older than time. This is not just about Africa. It's about what the world lost when it chose to forget. It's about what we must remember before it disappears again. So today we uncover the brilliance behind the lies. Today we remember the science they called magic. Before the Pythagorean theorem was ever scratched onto a Greek tablet, the builders of Kemet, ancient Egypt, were mapping the cosmos through stone. But they didn't call it science. For them it was harmony, the golden ratio. They lived it, built with it, aligned temples to it. Their pyramids weren't tombs, they were cosmic instruments. Every angle, every shadow, every line drawn on the desert floor was tied to a cycle. The flooding of the Nile, the rising of Sirius, the rotation of the sun. They didn't need telescopes. They had memory. They didn't need computers. They had rhythm. The sacred number pi? The Fibonacci sequence? It was written in the layout of Dendera, etched into the ruins of Luxor. And still, Western scholars debated whether it was accidental genius. It wasn't an accident. It was mastery. And when they asked the Egyptians who taught them such precision, the answer was always the same. Our ancestors, those who walked with the gods, those who listened. When European medicine was still bleeding patients and praying over fevers, Africa had already crowned a doctor. Imhotep, not just a physician, but a sage, architect, engineer, and high priest. A man so revered, he was later deified by the very people who wrote his genius out of their textbooks. Imhotep diagnosed over 200 diseases, performed surgeries, set broken bones, used honey as an antiseptic, centuries before Western science would prove it worked. He wrote the world's first medical text, built the step pyramid of Djoser, not with modern cranes but with cosmic math and stone precision. But instead of honoring him, they erased him. Instead of teaching his name, they replaced it with a Greek, Hippocrates, and told us that was the beginning of medicine. But the scrolls tell a different story. And the stones of Saqqara still whisper. Before your doctor ever held a scalpel, Imhotep held the truth. Centuries before the Industrial Revolution, deep in the forests of what is now Nigeria, the Nok civilization was working miracles with fire. They melted iron in earthen furnaces, crafted tools, weapons, and sculptures with such elegance, their artistry stunned even modern archaeologists. And yet, when the world speaks of the Iron Age, it rarely speaks of Nok. They say sub-Saharan Africa had no metallurgy. They say Africa waited for colonizers to bring civilization. But Nok had already cast gods in clay, had already shaped iron into order, had already built a legacy that outlasted empires. What was called primitive art was in fact a mathematical language of form, identity, and spirit. And to this day, no one knows exactly how they learned to smelt at such temperatures, so early in human history. Some say divine wisdom. Some say ancestral technology. But what we do know is this: they weren't waiting. They were already building. In the cliffs of Mali lives a people whose star maps shook the foundations of modern science. The Dogon. Long before telescopes could peer into space, the Dogon described the Sirius star system. Not just the star we see, but a second star invisible to the naked eye. They knew its orbit, its weight, its gravitational pull. Scientists scoffed. Until, in the 20th century, astronomers confirmed it all. Sirius B existed. Exactly where the Dogon said it would be. How did they know? They said the Namo, ancestral spirits, told them. That knowledge had been passed for thousands of years through oral tradition, not myth, memory. Was it alien contact, ancient technology, or a spiritual science the West has long refused to see? Whatever it was, it made one thing clear. Africa's relationship with the stars was never just about wonder. It was about knowledge, navigation, time, truth. They said it was magic, but the Dogon? They just called it knowing. In the deserts of Nubia, long before the ticking of clocks or the ringing of church bells, time was already sacred. The Nubians, Africa's ancient timekeepers, carved stone circles that aligned perfectly with the solstices. These were not mere decorations. They were calendars, observatories, cosmic instruments built into the earth itself. The most famous? Nabta Playa, older than Stonehenge. There, in the silence of the Sahara, Africans tracked the sun's movement with a precision that stunned modern archaeologists. Each monolith marked a season. Each shadow held a prophecy. While Europe stumbled through superstition, Africa was mapping celestial rhythms. This wasn't just science. It was spiritual timekeeping, a way to align farming, festivals, and faith with the divine rhythm of the universe. They didn't separate science from spirit. They saw time as sacred, not mechanical, and they lived by it. In the Western mind, university often begins with Oxford, Cambridge, or the Sorbonne. But before those halls echoed with Latin, the sands of Timbuktu whispered in Arabic, Songhai, and Mande. Here, in the heart of Mali, black scholars filled libraries with handwritten manuscripts. More than 700,000 scrolls, covering astronomy, mathematics, medicine, law, and philosophy. This was not folklore. This was documented, recorded, archived. The Sankore University rivaled any institution in the medieval world. Its professors debated theology, translated ancient Greek texts, and developed new mathematical theories. Students came from across Africa, and even from the Islamic world, to learn from black minds. And what did Europe do when it arrived? They didn't enroll. They burned the books, called it superstition, feared what they didn't understand. But even fire cannot erase brilliance. Today, the manuscripts are being recovered, letter by letter. Each scroll is a monument. Each word, a rebuke to the lie that Africa never thought deeply. Timbuktu proves. Africa had universities before Europe had grammar. Africa's genius wasn't only found in stars and scrolls, it was rooted in the soil. Long before tractors or satellite irrigation, African farmers were engineering the land with systems that would baffle even today's planners. The Saho and Afar people used vertical wells and underground water channels to irrigate dry lands. In Ethiopia, terracing on mountainous slopes turned erosion into productivity. In the Sahel, farmers practiced permaculture centuries before the term existed. Ancient Zimbabwe built granite cities without mortar, structured for airflow and seismic resistance. These were not isolated achievements. They were networks of genius, passed through generations, carved into stone, sung in ceremony. Even the banana, coffee, and sorghum that now feed the world? Their domestication began on African soil. But Europe didn't write that chapter. They only wrote the part where they discovered Africa, after Africa had already fed itself, clothed itself, and taught the stars. They said it was magic, because it didn't come from a white lab coat, because it wasn't written in Latin, because it challenged the myth of the primitive. But what they called sorcery was science. What they mocked as witchcraft was chemistry, astronomy, engineering, medicine, wrapped in prayer and rhythm. Africa didn't see the universe as a machine. It saw it as a living spirit. And in that spirit, black minds decoded the cosmos. From Imhotep to Timbuktu, from Dogon star maps to Zimbabwe's in stone, the evidence is overwhelming, but still inconvenient to colonial narratives. So the lie was repeated. Africa was dark. Africa was waiting. Africa had nothing to offer. But we know better now. To reclaim this history isn't just to correct a record. It's to awaken a generation. It's to say to every African child, you come from genius. Your roots are carved in brilliance. You descend from inventors, healers, astronomers, architects, scientists, and kings. They tried to bury that truth, but it keeps rising, like the Nile, like Sirius, like Africa herself. They called it magic, but now we call it what it always was: truth, legacy, science, spirit, Africa. If this resonated with you, Give the video a like, share it, and subscribe to keep this knowledge alive. Because the stories of our ancestors deserve more than silence. They deserve voice.